Right, so the chapter breakdown, yeah? We begin with verse 1 to verse 20. So from Alif Lam Mim all the way to verse 20, which talks about two personality types, the Muttaqeen and the Kafirin. The Muttaqeen is the one who takes guard of Allah. So he is aware that there is a God and that he needs to act in a certain way. Basically, the Muttaqeen is described in verses 1 to 5, and then the Quran focuses on those who reject those 5 verses and calls them alladhina kafaru, those who have rejected. And then the Quran describes those people. And guess what the description is? It's basically that those people are mischief makers on the earth. So that's the opposite of that state which I just mentioned, the Jannatu fil Ard, garden on the earth state. Next we move on to verse 21 to 29, which is the first call to mankind. And here the Quran describes our basic relationship with God, and that we are in the world, and how we can appreciate the signs in the world which will take us back to God. Next we have verses 30 to 39, which talks about Adam. So Adam is the first personality mentioned in the Quran on a sequential level. From the point of view of sequence, Adam is the first personality mentioned. And Allah talks about his falling from grace. He was in the garden. Once again, we go back to the garden, the utopic state. And Adam fell from the garden because he approached a tree, this tree to be exact, on the advice of Shaitan. Next, we move on to verse 40 to 46, which is the first call to Bani Israel. Adam and Bani Israel are very intimately related concepts. So, in these 7 verses, verses 40 to 46, there is a summary of Bani Israel and how they fell. And the reason is they failed to keep their covenant with Allah. So those 7 verses are the summarized exposition on how that happened. Next we move on to a fairly long passage from verse 47 to verse 103. And that's an in-depth analysis of why Bani Israel fell. I do believe that if you read these verses and try to understand them from a national level, from the point of view of a nation, you will see that there are principles you can extract and apply to any nation at any given time. And that's Bani Israel. So from verse 40 all the way to verse 103, it's all to do with Bani Israel. 2 calls to Bani Israel are mentioned there. So if we study it, we will understand the mechanics of a nation, why a nation rises and falls. Next is verse 104 to 121, which is the first instruction to the believers. So here, the people who have already believed in that Bani Israel story, God is telling them what to do. And what they're told to do basically, so we're still working on a very basic level here, God is telling them to, instead of being shepherded, they should be observed. So they should be made to do things on their own, but observed. So that's up to verse 121. Then we have another call to Bani Israel. Verse 122 to 152. And this time, Bani Israel are at their peak. So they have already established God's system. And God has compared his system with Islam, the acquisition of peace. Because God tells Ibrahim, Aslim, be peaceful, be peaceable. And Ibrahim says, Aslamtu li Rabbil Alameen. I am peaceful for Allah, for the Lord of the worlds. Next is a call to believers, where they are told to struggle in the way of God and to maintain an optimum performance. Astainu bisabri wa salawat, to be at top form. Next, it goes back to mankind. So it hasn't talked about mankind for over 100 verses, but in verse 168 it talks to mankind. And now it talks to mankind about consumption and how shaitan leads you to a poor philosophy of consumption. Then whoever who has believed in that, verses 172 to 177 will tell them how to respond to that. Consumption and righteousness. And you know the famous verse that it is not righteous to turn your face to the east or west, so-called. Yeah? That is in that passage. Then we have verse 178 to 182, which talks about believers and some laws. Some people say that these are laws of inheritance. We're still a bit unsure there. It's possible that these verses are talking about social dynamics as well. So that's some laws to believers, and we should link it back as well to the topic of consumption. Next we come to the action plan of believers. So believers from this is from verse 183 to 207. So the call to believers up to the end of that call, it talks about our lifestyle, how we should live in abstinence, siyam, how we should respond to the Quran, how we should struggle in God's way to establish God's system, how we divide our earthly lives to our after-earthly goals. So that's verses 183 to 207. Next we move on to a variety of social laws from verses 208 to 242, which talks about a series of social laws for believers to follow. I think the legal aspect is fully expounded here. So if you wish to have that utopian state, you need to have these laws in place. Next, you move on to verse 243 to 253, which talks about Bani Israel as an established nation. So Bani Israel as an established nation are told to go forth in the way of God, and they are to face with the oppressors of the world. So that's the next step. After establishing your nation, that's what you should do. So now if you have already believed in all this, the Quran starts again with verse 254 to 263, which talks about spending in the way of God and its relationship with struggling. And here you will find that the famous verse, Ayatul Kursi, the verse of the throne, verse 255, is in this passage. So Ayatul Kursi needs to be read in context of this passage as well. The other famous verse is La ikraha fid din, there is no compulsion in ad-din. Again, you need to place it back in the context. Next you have verses 264 to 266, which are metaphors about charity. So charity is an intricate part of God's system as well. In order to have a successful nation, charity must always be in place. And the opposite of charity is talked about next from verses 267 to 277. Charity and its relationship to its opposite, which is riba. Riba are the fruits of labor which leads to the oppression of the other. And charity is obviously the opposite. Sadaqah, yeah, that's obviously the opposite of that. So the nation must maintain a philosophy of sadaqah and not riba. Next, the Quran talks about helping people out of riba from verses 278 to 281. So again, the emphasis is made on riba, and here the verse which states that if you do not desist from riba, then take note of war from Allah and His Messenger. So God and His Messenger Himself are warring against riba, the fruits of labor which end up oppressing other people. For the next two verses, verses 282 to 283, it talks about making contracts. So again, a nation is built on contracts, so we are sure of where we stand, what our roles are, the relationships we have with other people in terms of businesses and so on. So now we come to the end of the chapter, which is verse 284 to 286, which is the summation of the mindset required to carry out this project. So in the beginning, you can see that this project is for the muttaqi, those who take guard from Allah and they follow a certain way. And 284 to 186 is the end, where the personality of the muttaqin are expounded upon. So there you have it. You have Al-Baqarah as a complete system. It is in fact various aspects of nation building. Now, so if you want to build a utopia on this earth, if you read this chapter, it is the beginning of the project, I think. So I hope you've benefited from that. I mean, I certainly, after looking at this myself, I've certainly seen some stuff which I haven't seen before. And once again, your comments and criticisms are always welcome. That's how we grow. This is not a perfect exposition. I'll never claim it to be. And your input is always welcome. Thank you very much for your viewership. Bye.